What's going on, everybody? My name is Jason Carr, and I got some pretty interesting stuff to share with you today. Be patient with me because I got a lot to share, but around 6 months ago, I had about $100,000 stolen from me by scammers. And I've waited a while to share this publicly because I really wanted to take my time to process it. And I wanted to remove some of the more difficult emotions from it before I just dumped it on everybody. But in that process of going through it and processing through it and all those things, I've learned a ton of really helpful lessons that I'd like to share today. But my objective here is twofold. I want to share the story of what happened so that people who are in a similar situation with being scammed can know what not to do, right? So people can avoid getting scammed like I did. And then also I want to share these important life lessons that I've learned through the process as well. Because ultimately, believe it or not, at this point, I actually understand that the value of what I learned through this disaster is actually worth significantly more than that $100,000 was ever worth. So there's a little bit of foreshadowing there. And that, it sounds stupid, it sounds cheesy, but that's the truth, ultimately. That's how I feel at this point, which is kind of crazy to me at this point, to be honest. And it's been a pretty incredible process that the Lord has done in my life through this whole thing. So, to start off with, I really need to talk about who I am and where I've come from, because ultimately, none of this stuff makes any sense until we get through some of this stuff. So, growing up, I was pretty heavily obsessed with tech, and especially computers, video games, operating systems, troubleshooting, graphics, and especially software development. All the things, right? And I have so many stories to tell on all that stuff, but I have to move through this relatively quickly, so I just can't tell them all. But I started programming in Visual Basic back in 7th grade. And by the time I was a sophomore in high school, I had put together this little CD of a bunch of the software that I had built, right? And I had written. And I mailed it off to a little tiny company called AbleSoft Solutions in Podunk, Illinois, little tiny town called Oregon, Illinois. And it took them a while to look at it. 6 months later, they finally looked at the CD, and I had given up hope at this point. But they finally looked at the CD, and they called me up that day. The president of the company, Noel, called me up that day and asked me to come in for an interview. And they were actually, I found out later, they're actually really close to just hiring me on the spot because they loved what was on that CD so much. So, unfortunately though, they soon learned that I was only a sophomore in high school, and eventually they just said, well, never mind. But thankfully, Noel had the foresight to tell me to go to college and then reach out to him when I was ready for an internship. And so ultimately, that's what I did. And it was a great experience. I started working for them the summer after my sophomore year of college, so 4 years later, and I just kept working for them through the rest of college and into my career. And I was just on cloud nine, man. It felt so good to finally be doing what I wanted to be doing. And I was making good money for it too, at least compared to what I was used to making, right? So dream number one for me, to be a professional software developer, came true very, very early on in my adulthood. And that was a huge blessing. I loved it. I was probably 19 years old, and I was finally doing what I wanted to be doing with my life, and I was finally making money at it. It was great. So I started my career at AbleSoft doing business software consulting. So businesses would come to us and present whatever their software needs were, and we would work with them to design and build whatever they needed. And it was great. I learned a ton, and I just really thrived doing this business software consulting stuff. And I did a ton of different things, a huge variety of stuff, from like working with McDonald's to build order entry software, to working on an application for farmers to track their crops, all kinds of crazy stuff. We did all kinds of stuff at that company. And so it was really good for me. And I did eventually move on to a couple other different jobs. I worked for Stanley Black & Decker for a while. And then I worked for a buddy of mine named Josh Carlson at a company called PerBite. Now, PerBite was really, really great because PerBite worked for nonprofit associations, still doing software consulting, but specifically for nonprofit associations. And so there was a lot more meaning in what we were doing, because every single one of those nonprofit associations is an association for some kind of good, right? And so there was definitely a lot more meaning in what we were doing. And I was also working for a close friend of mine, which is also really great. So my career was really just chock full of blessings at this point. Praise the Lord. There were plenty of struggles, but tons of goodness and tons of growth. And then the whole time I was working for these companies, I was also doing software development on the side. It was kind of ridiculous, actually, because I literally lived and breathed software development. I was doing it for work, and then I would come home and I would do it for fun. And some days, especially before I had kids, I was programming from 8 in the morning all the way until 10 o'clock at night. It got kind of ridiculous at times. And I didn't think I'd ever get tired of it. And one day I was playing some old DOS video games via DOSBox, which is a video game emulator for old MS-DOS video games, right? An emulator is something that allows you to play old games on new computers, or Nintendo games on on computers, or just allows you to play games for a different platform than what you're currently working on. But I came up with this idea to create what's called a front end for it, which basically just means to make a graphical interface for whatever is behind the thing that you're working on. So with DOSBox, you literally had to type in your commands just like you did back in the day in MS-DOS, right? So I made this visual interface for DOSBox that allowed you to put all your games on a physical shelf, or something that looked like a physical shelf, so you could easily play them and manage them and all that kind of stuff. And we called it Launchbox, or I called it Launchbox. It was just me at that point. There was no we. But Launchbox ended up just absolutely going to the moon and taking off. And it, at one point, was really the most popular video game front end anywhere, especially on Windows. And it's just been a tremendous blessing, that whole project. And it's crazy because it started as this little tiny thing that was only for DOSBox, and then I ended up working with the community, and the community gave me idea after idea after idea, and we added feature after feature after feature, and it was so much fun, and it just built up to be this incredible product. So eventually I ended up stepping down from PerBite, and I just did the Launchbox thing, and I worked on Launchbox exclusively for around 10 years. And man, I loved it. I just ate it up. I got to work in the video game scene. I got to manage and control the product. I was pretty well known as the creator of Launchbox, and we created a really amazing community together. And it turned out to be pretty incredibly lucrative as well. So blessings all around. And that was dream number 2 for me coming true. Because back in the day, I had dreamed of creating my own product that I could sell to people, and I had dreamed of being known as the creator of that product. And all in all, Launchbox has had millions of users over the years. It's crazy, it's nuts, man. So that was a really incredible experience. And I loved it, and I still do, right? But a few years ago, God really started to work on my heart in some pretty interesting ways. Now, I've been a Christian for a very long time, ever since I was a little kid, but it also was a huge afterthought for me for a long time. I started doing youth ministry on the side shortly after I got out of college as well. And by the way, I never graduated from college, which is another whole story. And the youth ministry thing is another whole story, but I'm not going to get into either of those things too deep here. But ultimately, I share all this stuff just to share that I had kind of two pieces of my life. Although Launchbox was a much bigger piece, I also was doing some ministry on the side with teens at the church and really enjoying that ministry as well. But man, there was just so much, especially about my relationship with God, that I did not get. And I have always struggled with sin tremendously. You can call it sin, you can call it making bad decisions, just not being a good person, you can call it whatever you want, abusing myself, whatever, right? I made a lot of bad decisions, and I've struggled with sin over and over and over again in my life. There was a point in time when half of the doors in my house had holes in them because I struggled with rage so bad that I would, instead of taking out my rage on people, praise the Lord, I never did that, I would slam my fist into doors and open them quickly and end up punching holes into my doors. So that's just an example, man. I've struggled with so many things. I've struggled with lust and self-hate, just being mean to people. Man, I could go on and on and on. But yeah, just being a good person and being holy has been a major, major struggle in my life. Obedience to the Lord has not been easy for me. And I think a lot of that is pretty normal. But I also get the impression that I've struggled with that probably more than a lot of people have, maybe even more than most people have. And I even went through this period of time in my life when I was a kid when I really, I had serious suicidal tendencies, and I was a huge suicide risk. So I've been there, and the Lord's conquered a lot of this stuff, which is amazing. I'm not there anymore. I don't struggle with suicide and depression, but I definitely have, right? But Launchbox's success, the success of Launchbox, was a really big gift to me because it taught me how much God really does love me. And I had been praying for Launchbox to take off every day. It was probably a couple years that I was working on it and trying to get it out there and all those things before it actually took off enough for it to be my full-time job. So I would pray every day for this, and multiple times a day sometimes. And sometimes it would be just a quick thing in passing, and sometimes I would just sit down and pray for the product to be successful for 15, 20 minutes. So spent a lot of time praying for Launchbox. And then not only did it take off, but from my perspective, it literally just went to the moon. It was crazy. We ended up, eventually we ended up hiring like 5 people. And it was just so cool because it just kept growing. There were lots of humbling experiences in that growth process too. There were lots of times when I screwed up really bad, times I had to do serious apologies with the community, and it got pretty rough at periods. But regardless of all that, the project just kept being more and more of a blessing, and it kept growing and growing. And in this process, of screwing up but still experiencing the incredible growth of Launchbox, the Lord taught me something pretty significant. He taught me that the extent of the power of His grace and His love is so much more powerful than anything in my life that I had done wrong. He taught me that the power of His grace is way more effective and strong than anything that I had ever done wrong. Guys, I had spent so much of my life just beating myself to hell for screwing up or being mean, not doing the right thing, whatever it was. And so I had this habit, I had this cycle, right? I'd be flying high for being used by the Lord in ministry, youth ministry, whatever. And I'd be flying high because of the tremendous growth of Launchbox and all that stuff, right? And all the goodness there. And then I'd screw up in some big way, and I'd be back to believing that I was a literal piece of crap, okay? So the cycle was always this state of euphoria and wonderful things and just being so grateful to be used by the Lord and grateful to have created such an awesome product, and then I'd mess something up and boom, I'd fall back down into literally believing that I was trash, right? And that rhythm or that cycle of achieving these great things and then blowing it and then feeling like crap pretty much describes my entire life for a very, very long time, over and over and over again. And I would get so discouraged because I believed that if I was going to fail so badly, that I did not deserve to serve the Lord. I still believed He loved me, and for the most part, I still believed that I had salvation, that I was going to heaven, but I didn't think that the Lord would want to work with me if I was going to jack things up so bad, right? And boy, was I wrong. Boy, was I wrong. The Lord taught me through the success of Launchbox and through ministry that His forgiveness and His grace is enough. And not only is it enough, but it's plenty. Now, lots of people don't really understand the story of the prodigal son in the Bible. It's a story where this teenager goes to his father and he says, "Give me my inheritance now. Give me my share of all the money that I will inherit now. I don't care that you're still alive. I want my money now." What's that sound like? Pretty typical of modern times. And then this teenager, after his father graciously gives him his inheritance prematurely, he runs away and he wastes it all on strippers and booze. Quite literally. That's what he does. He wastes it on parties and drunken debauchery, right? And then eventually, when it's all gone and he's starving to death, he thinks to himself, maybe I can just go home to my father and just ask if I can work for him, because even my father's servants are treated better than I'm being treated right now. Okay, so he goes home to his father to ask him if he can work for him. All right, and when he gets close, he finds his father looking out for him, and he sees him from far away, and his father runs to him, and he throws his arms around him, and he welcomes him home, and he throws a party for him. Now, this is such a beautiful story of forgiveness and grace. Obviously, the father represents God, and the prodigal son, the guy who runs away, represents us. in this parable. But what people don't understand is that the story of the prodigal son doesn't just happen once in our lives. And I didn't understand that either. Okay? The story of the prodigal son happens over and over and over again in each one of our lives. If we have a relationship with Jesus, and if we rely on him, God will run to us even when we're operating in sin. Okay? And he will take us back every single time. Luke 15:7. There is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. There is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. Over and over and over again. Guys, that changed my whole life because I stopped beating myself up for my mistakes and my sins, and I started to just run back to the Lord and ask for forgiveness every single time. And I learned to be confident that the Lord would take me back and that he would continue to use me despite my failures and my sins, my bad decisions. And you know what happened? I started to make less mistakes. I started to desire sin less. I started to fall to temptation less. And I started to crave more time with the Lord, more than things like money or fame or success. And all of this came through the success of Launchbox. So these positive changes in my own behavior, they didn't come from me trying to do better. They didn't come from striving to be a better man. They came from the power of God's grace. And they came from his grace blessing me with some victory. Now, the whole time that the Lord was blessing me with victory through Launchbox and goodness and abundance and all these things, I gave him credit. There's always been scripture in Launchbox. And I always publicly professed his name. But these victories, this goodness, these positive changes came from primarily accepting and believing and trusting that when the Lord says he loves me and he forgives me, that he really does love me and forgive me. And he's always proved it, and he always will prove it. But for such a long time, I didn't understand that, and I didn't grasp it, and I didn't fully believe it. So I know this is a really long way around to get into talking about money that was stolen from me, but I can't get into the lessons that I've learned without explaining this stuff. And we're almost there, okay? A few years ago, it hit me. I love programming and I love working on Launchbox, but I started to have a bigger desire to serve the Lord, and I started to have a bigger desire to do things that were more significant for the Lord than developing a video game front end. And that became more important to me than making money with Launchbox. And I sat with that for a while and I prayed about it. And eventually I actually heard the Lord tell me to sell Launchbox so that I'd be able to go into full-time ministry. And I'd done youth ministry on the side for a long time, so I mostly understood what that looked like, but it did take me a little while to digest it, right? 10 years of working on Launchbox and just loving it. Why would I ever just give it up, right? Launchbox had always been my passion project, and actually it was even tied to my personality, to my identity, right? It was what I was known for. And I'd been working on it for such a long time. But the Lord did a series of miracles. And eventually, I ended up selling Launchbox to a very good friend of mine. That same friend of mine who I had worked for at Purbite back in the day, Josh Carlson. And that's a whole another really cool story. But again, I can't get into those details today. So I had a pretty good nest egg. I had a pretty good nest egg from selling the company, right? And we worked out a payment plan and all the things, and I jumped headfirst into full-time volunteer ministry, all right? I taught a junior high and a high school Bible class. I started preaching. I led Bible studies. I started mentoring people. I continued in youth ministry, went on mission trips, and it was definitely a growing process because I went from programming by myself all day to social everything, right? And I had done a lot of community stuff, and I had done a lot of management at this point, so I was used to doing some social stuff, but still the vast majority of my days were by myself programming in front of a computer. And so it was a major challenge to move from introverted activities into all extroverted activities, right? So the Lord had a lot of work to do to make it so that I wasn't constantly worn out. But it's been such a tremendous blessing to be serving the Lord full time for the past few years. And I have valued being used by the Lord consistently and continuously way more than I have valued doing things that are easy or that are a good fit for me personally. I am really a pretty reserved person. I'm a huge introvert. So it's been really hard to spend so much of my time with people, but it's also been so good and so rewarding that I really wouldn't have it any other way. But now we can finally get into this stolen money situation. We've had some significant ups and downs in the past few years, but nothing like that day when I figured out that $100,000 was stolen from us. So we had this nest egg from the sale of the business, and our hearts were to be able to live off of this nest egg while we did full-time volunteer ministry, my wife and I. And so we weren't getting paid for any of the ministry we were doing by choice, right? Most of it was by choice. And we felt like that was what we were called to do. The Lord has called my wife and I, at least for the past, to be volunteer ministers, right? And on top of that, we kept up our church tithe and we kept up our giving. So we've been regularly giving to the church and to other things as well out of this nest egg that we received from the sale of the business. So all of this money that we received and were receiving was specifically set aside for ministry. We looked at it as a means to be able to do ministry for free. And of course, over time, as expected, that nest egg did decrease pretty significantly as we paid for our expenses. But it was all set aside for ministry. And it allowed us to minister full-time for free. So 6 months ago, I had about $100,000 of that nest egg invested into Bitcoin, okay? And it had proven to be a very good investment. It had increased by something like 25% at that point. And it went up and down quite a bit, of course. But it was proving to be a very good investment. And so we were super happy with it. But it was just sitting there for when our bank account ran low so we could pull some of it out to replenish it. Whenever we needed to pull from it, it was sitting there so we could use it for our expenses so we could continue to do ministry. Now, I had done a ton of research on crypto on the web. So I knew about the risks of crypto, and I'd even mined a little bit of it in the past, and I studied all these coins and strategies and risks and all the things because it was a significant hobby of mine for a while. So I want to note that I really knew what I was doing with crypto pretty well. And I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I am smart enough to be able to run my own successful business and be a successful programmer and build popular software. So generally, I know kind of what I'm doing, you know? I'm certainly not one to take dangerous risks with $100,000. That's not me, right? So I took the advice of experts and I bought a hardware wallet to store my Bitcoin in. And all of that $100,000 of Bitcoin was stored on this hardware wallet. So I'd also previously purchased a large safe and I had it professionally installed in my shop. It was bolted down to the concrete in the garage. And of course, this hardware wallet was in it, right? So it also made backup copies of all my seed phrases and all the things that are needed in order to make sure I don't lose those funds, right? And then 6 months ago, I was on vacation in Illinois. I was visiting my family in Illinois for Christmas. And Google, of all companies, gives me a call. And they leave me a voicemail asking me to call them back because of a security issue, okay? So it took me a few days to call them back because I'm like, what? This is probably just spam or a scam, right? But eventually I did call them back and I found out that somebody in Germany had somehow stolen pictures of my driver's license and was trying to hack into my Google account. So that was a little bit alarming, as you can imagine. Now keep in mind that it's a serious issue because most people have literally everything connected to their email. So if someone was trying to hack into my Gmail account, they could do some serious damage across the board. Financially, reputation-wise, anything, right? But Google actually handled the situation very well. And they helped me secure my account to be less of an issue going forward. And everything was good, all was well, right? Now, this wasn't the first time that I found out that someone was trying to steal my identity, unfortunately, because of Launchbox. With Launchbox, I've actually dealt with stolen accounts before, especially video game related accounts. I guess because I'm somewhat of a public figure with Launchbox, that makes me a pretty significant target because this has happened to me over and over again. At one point in the past, I had several accounts stolen, and I had to use a tool, really a password manager, to change every password across the entire internet to a random password of numbers and letters. Which, honestly, if you're not doing that, you probably should at this point. Just FYI. But I thought I was secure after doing that. I thought I was pretty secure. Patted myself on the back and said, well, this will never happen again, right? Not really true, okay? So when Google contacted me, they verified that it was actually them talking to me and it wasn't a scammer by proving it on a Google website, right? So they didn't ask me for any account information. So it felt pretty legit, and I knew it was legit. I didn't question it. They proved it to me in several different ways by confirming everything and all those things. They knew who I was. I didn't have to tell them who I was. And they proved it to me they proved that they were Google by updating Google's website with details on the call, right? So now fast forward about a month from that, all right? I was under the impression, and I still believe, that Google had saved my butt in this process, okay? A month later, it was New Year's Eve 2025, okay? December 31st. And that happens to be the day of my anniversary with my wife. But also, Amber and I were hosting this huge ministry/worship event at our house. Actually, right here, around the campfire, we were hosting it, and then also inside, right? And the plan was to worship in the new year, all right? So we were gonna sing some worship songs up to the new year, celebrate, and then sing some more worship songs after the new year hit. It was really a pretty cool experience that night. It was awesome. And it was a huge blessing. But we had close to 100 people over to our house that night. We're gonna come back to that because that actually created some confusion for me, all right? But earlier that day, so we're trying to prepare for this huge party, this huge celebration of the new year, this huge worship event, ministry event, right? And as I was trying to prepare for it, I got a call from Coinbase, all right? Now, Coinbase is this crypto exchange. It's arguably the biggest crypto exchange in the entire world. And you can store crypto in Coinbase, but the crypto that I had was not stored in Coinbase. My crypto was stored in this hardware wallet in the safe in my garage, right? So, that said, I had used Coinbase several times in the past, because anytime that I wanted to convert cash to crypto or crypto to cash, I would use Coinbase to do it, because Coinbase is what's called an exchange. It allows you to exchange crypto for cash, or cash for crypto, or crypto to some other type of crypto, or whatever, right? So I had an active Coinbase account that I would use from time to time to exchange these funds. So I answered this call from Coinbase, and it went almost exactly like my call from Google did. They even proved to me that they were Coinbase by confirming the activity on the Coinbase website, right? And they didn't ask me for any of my personal information. They knew who I was, all those things, right? And they claimed that someone, just like Google did, they claimed that someone was trying to hack into my Coinbase account using my driver's license. All right? So this was not really surprising for me at this point, because I knew this was happening with Google. Why wouldn't it be happening with Coinbase? All right? And it was actually much less concerning for me than Google was, because I didn't really have any funds in Coinbase. And I didn't think about the fact that my bank account was connected to Coinbase at the time. So I wasn't as alarmed by this as I was with Google. But I did eventually realize that. And so I started to take it a little more seriously once I figured out that Coinbase has access to all of my funds because my bank account is connected to Coinbase, right? So there could be some serious issues there. So I confirmed with Coinbase that it was not me that was trying to get into my account with my driver's license, right? And Coinbase told me that they were working on locking down my account and that they would call me back, okay? So I went back to cleaning and preparing for this party, right? And eventually, they called me back and they claimed that I was still getting attacked and that they needed to help me secure my funds, was the words that they used. So I went through this process of removing my bank account from Coinbase, and doing other little things to secure my account, or supposedly secure my account. And they told me that they were going to continue to monitor my account and that they would again call me back if needed. All right. So fast forward to about an hour or so before the New Year's Eve event at my house. Okay. So the New Year's Eve event starts at 6. 5 o'clock. I receive another call from Coinbase, and they told me that because my funds were on a hardware wallet, I needed to plug my wallet in and follow their instructions in order to secure my funds. Now, huge red flags went off in my head when I heard this, obviously. So, or maybe not obviously, but the whole point of having a hardware wallet is so that it's disconnected from the internet, so if somebody's trying to steal your stuff, they can't over the internet, right? So I immediately refused, and I told them how stupid it would be for me to plug in my hardware wallet at all when I'm obviously getting attacked. So this Coinbase guy told me that he was going to talk to a supervisor and call me back because I just outright refused to do it. All right, so 15 minutes later, again, we're coming up on 6 o'clock when the party starts. 15 minutes later, I get a call back again from Coinbase. All right? And he told me that he had talked to his supervisor and that they understand that their processes need changed. And they told me that they're going to work on changing their processes because obviously this wasn't ideal, which makes sense, right? So that made me feel a little bit better that I was helping them with their broken processes, right? But then they claimed that they were following along and complying with Trezor support. Okay, so the brand of my hardware wallet was Trezor. So they're working supposedly with Trezor support to do what Trezor wants them to do to make sure my funds are secure, right? So supposedly Trezor was insisting that I need to plug my wallet in so that they can secure my funds. So still, I went back and forth with them many times on this. And it was getting closer and closer and closer to the time for this party to start. And I finally, unfortunately, just caved. And I plugged in this hardware wallet to my computer, and I did what Trezor had instructed me to do, or supposedly what Trezor had instructed me to do. So Trezor had sent me a custom version of their wallet app in order to supposedly secure my funds, right? Well, so all this went on and I kind of just moved on from it because the party started, right? And we had our New Year's Eve event and it went great and all was awesome, or so I thought, right? So I didn't think about this for 2 months. Didn't think about it at all. Didn't look at my Bitcoin funds, didn't look at anything, right? But 2 months later, it was time for me to withdraw some of that Bitcoin that was stored up on the hardware wallet, right? And so I checked the balance on the Bitcoin and I found it completely empty. All right? My heart just literally sank. It went from this is a normal day, everything is good, to whoosh. Like I got nothing. I'm just stunned, right? So I sat there in disbelief and shock for about 10 minutes. And then I frantically started searching through transaction histories and all the technical details I could find. I did some research on what to do and just to try and figure out what actually happened, right? And sure enough, on New Year's Eve, all of my Bitcoin had been transferred out of my hardware wallet around 6 o'clock p.m., right when my party, the New Year's Eve party, had started, right? So I found the transactions and it had all been transferred out right around 6 o'clock. Okay, so our entire nest egg at that point was just gone. It was poof, $100,000 that we had set aside for ministry, stolen, just gone. And it was because of my own negligence. So this was literally the hardest thing that I have had to deal with in many years, maybe my whole life. I've had some pretty rough stuff in a lot of other cases too, but this is up there, right? And I want to talk about what it put me through. I want to talk about some of the lessons I learned from it. But first, I got to talk about how they pulled this off, right? And obviously, you've got some clues from this story, but I want to talk about exactly how they technically pulled it off so that I can prevent other people from being scammed like this, right? So, I've already shared, I am a developer. I am a computer guru, right? I know what I'm doing with all this stuff. I'm not the world's foremost expert on all of this stuff, but I know what I'm doing with this stuff. And I started to think through the process of how it all went down and how they could have done it. And I remembered that they originally proved to me that they were Coinbase through the Coinbase website. Now this does get kind of technical at this point, but because I'm a developer, I know how what's called DNS works. So on every Windows machine, there's a file called the hosts file. And this file allows you to override the IP address that websites point to. And sure enough, when I checked this host file on my machine, the IP address for Coinbase.com had been overwritten to a custom fake IP address, an incorrect IP address. So what this means is that this scam was so incredibly elaborate that they had completely copied the Coinbase website enough to convince me that it was legit. And when I went to Coinbase.com, I was on a fake version of it instead of the real thing. Honestly, I still find this hard to believe. It's insane to me that a scammer would be that elaborate. But that is exactly what happened to me, okay? They created a fake version of the Coinbase website in order to convince me that they were Coinbase who was talking to me. I got in there, I logged in like normal, I looked at my balance and all those things. It was super realistic. It was pretty incredible, all right? And that alone is nuts. You gotta put a ton of work into a website to build something like that. I don't know if they somehow got a hold of Coinbase's source code. That's possible, right? I don't know how they pulled that off. It's crazy. And then even worse, in order for them to be able to change the host file on my machine, they had to somehow hack into my machine, right? So somehow they were able to hack into my Windows machine and change that host file. And I still don't know how they did that, but they probably used some kind of Windows exploit. Windows has a lot of bugs that are always being fixed in Windows Update to fix these exploits, right? So somehow they were able to hack into my machine enough to change this host file. And the rest is pretty self-explanatory if you think about it. Obviously, I was never really talking to Coinbase. And I was never really talking to Trezor either, obviously. Although I never talked to Trezor, supposedly Coinbase was the one who was talking to Trezor. But because of my previous situation with Google, and because they were able to hack into my machine, they were able to convince me that they were actually Coinbase, right? this whole conversation happened almost exactly like my real conversation with Google happened. Now, one of the crazy things that I've been considering, and I don't think this is possible, but at this point, I wonder if that entire conversation that I had with Google could have been manipulated and faked, just like this conversation a month earlier, in order to prep me for this conversation with Coinbase. But when I think about that, that doesn't really make any sense. And I think that's just paranoia, to be honest, at this point, because none of that makes sense. And I haven't had any issues with any of my Google stuff. So this is the kind of crazy stuff that your mind goes through when you get something like $100,000 stolen from you, right? But because I was rushed and I wasn't using my own brain and I didn't put my foot down hard enough, I stupidly plugged my Trezor hardware wallet into my computer and ran this supposedly custom wallet app that they gave me to quote unquote secure my funds. All right? So obviously this was a hacked hardware wallet app, and it was designed to steal my funds instead of secure my funds. And I didn't find it out until 2 months later. I didn't even think about it. And at this point, or shortly after this happened, I did go ahead and report it to the FBI. But really, I don't have much hope in ever getting these funds back. I don't think I ever will. Most people don't lose funds like this out of a hardware wallet. And it was definitely my own stupid for not seeing the writing on the wall. Even though, I mean, this was the most elaborate scam that I have ever heard of, that I've ever seen anyways. And the crazy thing about all this is I even make a habit of watching scam baiting videos. I don't know if you know what a scam baiting video is, but scam baiting videos are videos where good people get in touch with scammers and they convince these scammers that they're going to get a lot of money for them, and they waste their time and they catch scammers and they send them to jail. And it's actually a really useful thing that a lot of people do these days. But even with knowing so much about scammers and knowing so much about tech and even knowing so much about crypto, I was still tricked. It's pretty crazy. It's pretty nuts in my mind. So this put me into a state of depression for at least a couple weeks. I hadn't dealt with depression in a very long time, but this really, really hit me hard. It made me feel like this tremendous idiot. Like I haven't felt like this big of an idiot in so many years, like probably since I was a kid. I felt like the biggest idiot in the world. And it hurt even worse because I felt like a bad provider for my family for a long time. And, you know, that was actually an area of pride for me because I have been historically a really good provider for my family. And so being attacked like this made me feel like a horrible provider for my family. And this whole thing, honestly, almost just made me give up on the world completely. I mean, if you think about it, if a guy like me, who is super technical, is unable to protect his own digital funds, then the world is really in some serious trouble. This is a big deal, right? At least in my mind. And so I went through this sort of existential crisis thing, right? When I realized that I was not smart enough or strong enough to protect my own funds, it really hit me. But ultimately, what really made me the saddest about this whole thing, what depressed me the most, was that I had lost $100,000 that was meant to be used for ministry. And it was my fault. I had lost $100,000 that was meant to be used for good, to help do amazing things. Because remember that not only was I using this for my own ministry, to share about Jesus with people, I was using this to give as well. So because this $100,000 was stolen, less people will be talked to about Jesus. And because this $100,000 was stolen, less homes would be built for the poor. Less churches would be built. Because those are the kinds of things that I give money to, right? So all of this just came down, this ugly mess of disgusting consequences came down, and it was my fault because I'm the one that didn't see it coming, right? So that was really the source of my depression there for a couple weeks. Now, depression for me, I haven't been depressed in a long time, maybe 10 years or so. But depression for me has been a major battle in my life. And so the fact that this depression only lasted 2 weeks is honestly a miracle, because it could have lasted years and years and years and years. Okay? And this wasn't just an attack on my personal finances, my family's personal finances. This was ultimately an attack on the ministry of the Lord. Now, I know that this was a spiritual battle. And unfortunately, I lost. I lost the spiritual battle. The devil uses evil people all the time to do things exactly like this, and to discourage and to destroy and to humiliate and to censor and hate, all those things, right? This is typical devil operation stuff, right? And when we do things like go into full-time ministry and we do good, the devil hates it. And he will do everything he can possibly do to wreck you in this. And that's really what was going on here. That's really what was going on here. So, but I didn't fully understand that at the time. And when all this stuff hit me, I was so close to turning to bitterness. I had multiple friends in my life tell me, don't allow this to break you, okay? And that was the Lord reaching out to me, because I was ready to be broken. This pissed me off so hard, the fact that I had lost $100,000 to these scammers that was going to be used for ministry. It pissed me off so hard that I almost said F you to literally the whole entire world and just crawled in a hole and disappeared. I was literally ready to burn the entire world down to the ground. That's how much this affected me. I was so angry and bitter. And there were whole days, probably there was at least a week in there, that I did nothing but fight that desire. And I did have to disappear from people for a while. I did have to just go into hiding a little bit, because all I wanted to do for at least a week was just burn everything down. It's all crap. It all needs to just go away. this whole thing just needs started over. Give it all up. It's trash. That was my mindset. And that's really what it feels like to, at least as a Christian, to be broken and turn to bitterness. At least that's what it looks like for me. I learned what it looks like for me. I never really experienced that. That was a new one for me. So, but the Lord did miracles and brought me out of that. The Lord reminded me that this was a spiritual battle, right? That if I turn to bitterness and rage and burning the whole world to the ground, that's exactly what the devil wanted. That was his whole goal, right? He wants us to be destroyed. He wants us to stop doing ministry. He wants to just burn it all to the ground. And even better, if he can convince a Christian to do it, right? So the Lord has promised to provide for us despite this situation. And he has been perfectly faithful to do that. He's been perfectly faithful to provide for all of our needs ever since. Over and over again, he has been encouraging me. He's been giving me encouraging words daily, right? And he's brought me to this place where I better understand how powerful he really is, how powerful the goodness of God is, and how little I really have to worry about. Because even if the devil steals $100,000 and uses it for evil, God has the ability for so much more abundance than that. And that's what I'm learning. So we need to jump into a little bit more details on some of those lessons that I've learned. We're done with the technical details. We're done with the story. So let's dive in finally to some of these important lessons that I've learned. This is interesting here. The first lesson that I learned in going through this process and then coming out on the other side in goodness, right, and not bitterness, is that I'm not in as much control as I think I am. I am not in as much control as I think I am. So I'm generally a rebel at heart. I've always been a rebel. I don't like trusting governments especially. I don't like trusting any authority figures really. As a matter of fact, that's an area of sin in my life, or has been routinely in the past, right? I'm just a rebel. I'm naturally a huge rebel. And I especially don't like trusting banks and governments with my money. And I would rather trust my funds myself, or protect my funds myself. I trust myself with my funds more than I would trust any government organization or bank or whatever, right? Now, it's not like I have a whole bunch of cash in my safe. I don't, right? I put money in the bank just like everybody else. But the concept of being able to have money as crypto on a hardware wallet that I completely control myself was very appealing to me, right? But if I had put my money into the bank and it was FDIC insured, I would have likely had it back very quickly if it was stolen from me like this. If it ever even got stolen to begin with, right? So that was a very important lesson for me to think about. And even if it was still in Bitcoin, and if I had stored it in Coinbase instead of in my own hardware wallet, I would have likely been able to get it back, even if it was stolen. Because Coinbase has all these protections and policies in place to help with stuff like this. But the fact that I had it on my own private hardware wallet, completely in my control, my own stupid decisions were able to get me to lose the whole thing. So I'm not sure that this widespread advice that all these crypto experts tell you, that you should keep all your crypto on a hardware wallet under your control, I'm not sure if that's really the best advice here, right? And this ties in with the next lesson that I've learned. Even though I'm a wise and intelligent person, I am still capable of making some incredibly stupid decisions, right? Especially if someone who is also smart is working as hard as they can to attack me and trick me. I am capable of making some very, very bad decisions, right? So another weird lesson that I've learned that I never would have admitted before. Large groups of people with good intentions are generally more trustworthy than you are. That one hits me. It still hurts my heart to say that a little bit. Large groups of people with good intentions are generally more trustworthy than I am, even when it's my money, right? And I thought that I would do a better job protecting my funds than Coinbase and banks and the federal government. But now I know that the federal government and banks and Coinbase actually do a good job protecting your money compared to what you can do on your own, which is crazy to me, because I know that the motives of the federal government and Coinbase and banks and all those things, they don't always have good intentions, and I know that, and I think that's where this viewpoint of mine came from, right? But they all do at least have a vested interest in protecting your money, right? So they've proven many times in the past that they are willing to step up and help in these kinds of situations. But because my money was on this hardware wallet and only in my control, I lost out on all of those opportunities. Large groups of people with good intentions are generally more trustworthy than you are, or than I am. All right? It's a huge lesson right there. But the most important thing, okay, all of those are important, but the most important thing that I've learned through all of this stuff is that God can redeem literally any situation. Now, I knew that to some extent, but I didn't understand how much he could redeem a situation like this, right? God obviously didn't steal these funds. He didn't design this to happen. He didn't want this to happen, right? It wouldn't make any sense at all to blame any of this on the Lord. But that's literally what some people do in these kinds of situations. And even I struggled with this for a day or two, okay? Why did you let this happen, Lord? Why did you do this? That is a very natural thing to do when stuff like this happens, right? But that doesn't make sense, especially not in this situation when all of this was designed for ministry. All this money was set aside for ministry. God doesn't cause evil stuff to happen to people, but he does redeem it. And he has significantly redeemed this situation for our family. It's become a tremendous blessing. All right? He's proving to us that he can and he will provide for us no matter what. And, you know, at this point, we haven't missed a single bill. We still have zero credit card debt. Everything is getting paid. We're not starving. We still have our house. And man, we've received random funds from the craziest places, the strangest of places. We've gotten huge refunds from the utility company. We've gotten refunds from our mortgage company from 2 years ago. Just weird stuff, right? And on top of that, having less money stored up has been way more of a blessing than I ever thought possible. I never expected that to be a blessing at all. But it's actually really freeing to not have to worry about any kind of a nest egg, okay? And just being able to trust the Lord that He's going to provide has been a really wonderful thing. Everything that comes in, all the money that comes in is more of a blessing at this point. And we're not wasting money on stupid stuff like 3 streaming services that we never use, right? We're not wasting money on food delivery. That was, probably just killing us slowly anyways. So the Lord has turned this experience of being scammed out of $100,000 from something that literally almost broke me and almost turned me to permanent bitterness and rage. He's turned it into something to grow us, and He's turned it into ways that He can show His love for us. And it's just been an incredible blessing. Praise the Lord. Thank you for listening.